Welcome to Tiger Chainsaw Interviews. These exclusive interviews will give you a behind-the-scenes retrospective mixed in with some amazing secrets of your favorite games and franchises by the developers and creators of them. Now, if I have filmed the interview, you'll be able to watch it. Otherwise, it's a phone interview, so just sit back and relax. Now, I have done some incredible exclusive interviews with some amazing gaming legends in this community. So hit that sub button to make sure you don't miss any of those interviews. Alright, let's get to our interview of the day. Today, my guest is one of the most popular Nintendo counselors from his era, but it's not going to be for the reason that you expect it. Kirk Starr caused Nintendo phone lines to crash. Everyone was calling to talk to Kirk and call him out because a lot of gamers thought he was lying and he had to defend himself, but more on that later. This interview is going to be about Kirk's career as a Nintendo counselor, his love for Mega Man 2, and some insight on the game Contra. If you're looking to hear the secrets of Nintendo's infamous Christmas party filled with sex, drugs, and alcohol, well, you've come to the right interview. My guest today is Kirk Starr. Now, Kirk, before we begin, I have to comment on the photo associated with you in Nintendo Power. You can certainly pull off a mullet, and I just love that era of style. I don't think we'll find anyone as cool as you were.
Yeah, well, you take a lot of crap for the mullet, but you got to understand at that time, mullets were a hugely popular hairstyle. If you have that issue, I think it's issue 18, Dr. Mario, and you look at all four of us, because there's four counselors, we all have mullets.
You all got the mullet. I looked for sure. It's pretty comical. I love it.
So it's not something I'm real proud of, but it is what it is. So
now, did you pull a lot of girls with that mullet?
I guess. I mean, I never had trouble getting dates. I'm not sure it was the mullet that did it. I'd like to think it was my sparkling personality, but who knows? Maybe it was the hair. I eventually grew it out all one length. So I not long after I left Nintendo, I ended up playing guitar in a Metallica cover band.
Oh man, you were living the life.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I try to have fun.
I love it.
I had the full head of all one length hair down to my waist for a long time.
Wow.
And then I had to, of course, cut that once my hairline started to recede. You don't want long hair once your hairline recedes, because then it just looks like you're wearing a wig that's slipping off the back of your head.
Right.
Nobody wants to see that. So.
What a lifestyle, Kirk. Nintendo Power Counselors rocked, but you really rocked. Let's jump into this interview, and I want to know, what was your introduction into gaming? What were the games that you were playing when you were growing up?
I on my 9th birthday, that'd be like 1975, my parents got me the hot new system that was coming out. It was called Pong. And it was basically, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it was basically electronic ping pong. You plugged this machine into your TV. You had these two paddles that came off that were like dials, right? And then on the screen was basically a top-down view of a ping pong table, and a white square bounced back and forth. It was your ball, and you could play against the computer, or you could play another person, and the two of you just turned your little dial to control the vertical movement of the paddle. And you just bounce this white dot back and forth at each other and try to, you're basically playing ping pong. And it sounds boring. It sounds kind of lame, but it was super addictive. And I played it like crazy for 2 or 3 years until I got my Atari 2600. I think in my 12th or 13th birthday, my parents got me a Atari 2600. So then, now I'm playing Space Invaders, Breakout, Centipede, Missile Command, cool stuff like that. So, and then the Atari 2600, held me until I got to high school. And once I got into high school, kind of put the home system away. I played video games mostly in arcades at that point, on upright machines all through high school. And then it was, I think, the year after I graduated from high school is when the NES came out.
Okay.
And of course, so then I got into Super Mario Brothers like the rest of the world and loved that. And, the rest is history. I, been playing video games ever since.
So how old were you when you became a Nintendo counselor, and what was your journey into becoming one?
Okay, so let's see. It was in May of '89 is when I started. So that would maybe 23 years old, 22, and I had just gotten out of college, and was the summer after I was completing college, and a friend of mine was already a gameplay counselor. And he came and he said, "Hey, Nintendo's hiring more gameplay counselors. You should go apply." But the way Nintendo did things, they didn't hire people directly. They hired through a temporary service. And then if you did well, for like 6 months, then they would hire you on permanently, what they called hire you on as NOA, which was Nintendo of America. But to start there, you had to start as a temp. So I went to the temporary service and told them I wanted to apply for the gameplay counselor position. And they told me, well, unfortunately, the gameplay positions are all full. We don't have anything for you. And I was bummed. They said, but we do have a spot in the mailroom if you want. And I thought, well, I'll take it. I just get my foot in the door. The goal is to become a game counselor. I'll work in the mailroom, and I'll figure out a way to get into gameplay from there, right? So I took the job in the mailroom, and I got into the mailroom. It turned out that my supervisor in the mailroom used to be a gameplay counselor. And so I started picking his brain on how to get into gameplay, and I had revealed to him that I had made these maps of the Mega Man 2 Dr. Wily stage. Like, if you look at Mega Man games, you can tell they're made out of bricks, like cubes. Everything's a square in Mega Man, if you really look closely at it. So you can very easily map Mega Man on graph paper. Well, not easily, but you can map it out on graph paper. So I had, before I ever worked at Nintendo, I loved Mega Man 2 so much that I mapped out the entire Wily stage, block by block, every power-up, every energy tank, every one-up, little call-outs pointing to certain areas on what to do with this enemy or that enemy, how to beat all the bosses, and so on, right? And so I had this completed set of Dr. Wily maps that I had drawn, and I gave them to my supervisor in the mailroom and said, can you show these to the supervisor in gameplay? And he's like, sure. So he took them, and I don't know, it was 2 or 3 days later, a supervisor from gameplay comes to me and says, did you really draw these maps yourself? I said, I sure did. He's like, how would you like to be a gameplay counselor?
Wow.
And I was like, that's the dream. I don't want anything more than that. And he's like, all right, Monday morning, 9 a.m., show up at gameplay training. You're in.
Wow.
And that was it, yeah. So then the following Monday, I show up at, training, and they set me down at a TV with a Nintendo and handed me Super Mario Brothers and got me started.
That is just so cool how you started in the mailroom, and the maps that you made were just so impressive the Nintendo just had to have you as a counselor. What a foot in the door.
Yeah, and it would actually go on to, those maps would actually eventually go on to help other gameplay counselors. I didn't know when I made them that was how things worked, but, we can get into that later.
So what were the rules for becoming a Nintendo counselor? Were there guidelines that they set for you? Was there any training? Did you have homework? And was it true that they gave out a test?
Well, okay, so training was about 3 weeks. And as far as rules, the only rules Nintendo really had was that you understand that Nintendo is a family company, that the customer always came first, right? And that fun was the end goal no matter what. So as long as you could remember that those three things, then you would succeed at Nintendo. They're like the world's oldest game company. I don't know if you know, but Nintendo started when I was there, they were already 100 years old.
They started with playing cards, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. So I didn't know that when I started there. When they told me that, I thought, oh my God, I'm working for like the world's oldest toy company. That's a really cool thing, you know? So yeah, it was all about the customer, and all about having fun and remembering that, you know, everything needed to stay family oriented. And so those were the rules. And then as far as training went, you know, it was, you had, I believe, 3 weeks, if I recall correctly. In the first 2 weeks in training, you had to get through every Nintendo title. It wouldn't do for you not to know questions on Nintendo titles. I mean, you work for Nintendo, for crying out loud, so you better know that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you had to play everything. And if it was a game that couldn't be completed, you at least had to play it long enough that you could answer just about any question that could be thrown at you about it.
Wow.
So they sat me down. First thing, they handed me Super Mario Brothers and, you know, said, finish this. And when I was finished with that, they gave me Super Mario Brothers 2. And then they gave me Legend of Zelda, and I was done with that. Then they said, do the second quest. And we did the second quest. And then they handed me Legend of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, right? And then I think after that, it was Kid Icarus. I had to finish that. And then I started working on all the older titles, like Excite Bike, all the way down to Clu Clu Land. And once you knew all of the Nintendo titles, then that was 2 weeks you had to get through all of that.
Wow.
And once you did that, then you had 1 more week to go where you could work on licensee titles. So, you know, we had licensees like Konami, Capcom, Broderbund, Acclaim, all these licensees that made games for Nintendo. And we took calls on those as well. As long as it was licensed for play on Nintendo, we would take calls on it. So you had to know all of that too. So I think my last week in training, they had like a top 10 list of the most popular licensee titles that we were getting calls on at the time. And they wanted you to get through that list if you could. Well, I got through like 4 or 5 of them. I think I did Contra, Dragon Warrior. I remember Legacy of the Wizard was one of them. That's a brutal game. Metal Gear, I think, was the other one I got through. And maybe one other, I can't remember.
Yeah, the games you're mentioning, these aren't easy games. So
no, well, that's what I think is so cool about retro gaming becoming so popular now, is because, I mean, the Dark Souls games notwithstanding, games today are not as hard as they were back then.
Correct, yeah.
They're just not. I mean, even games like Contra, a lot of people had trouble with that. If you weren't a super gamer, you had a hard time because you only got 3 guys unless you knew the code, right?
Yeah.
And so that made games hard. Nowadays, you get to continue as much as you want,
right?
And that so it's really cool for me to see the new generation getting into these old games that I played and getting to know what it was like for me back then. So yeah, I love that, and I could name so many games that were back then that would make people cry today trying to get through them.
Yeah.
Bayou Billy.
Yeah.
Try playing Bayou Billy or Fester's Quest. These games were tough.
Yeah, they'll kick your butt.
Yeah, Battletoads. I mean, that one was brutal. But yeah, but it was my living. It was what I did for a living, so I had to get through them. Now, as far as homework and a test, it is true that Nintendo very much encouraged you to play at home as well. And they encouraged it by giving you free systems. When I started as a gameplay counselor my first day, they handed me a brand new NES to take home.
Wow.
I already had one, but they gave me one because they needed me to have it. And then a few months after I started, I think the Game Boy came out in like July or August of '89. And when I came into work that day, there was a Game Boy on my desk, brand new, waiting to go home with me. And same thing with the Super NES. When that was released, the day it was released, there was one on my desk for me to take home.
Talk about job perks.
What's that?
I said talk about job perks.
Yeah, it was a perk, but it was also Nintendo's clever way of getting me to work from home for free.
Yeah.
And people say, well, that's not working, it's playing it. Well, yeah, and that's what's so great about it is that I didn't mind working from home for free because, because really it was a perk. And, plus getting to play stuff before it ever came out, and stuff like that. I mean, I remember when the Super Famicom was out in Japan, but it wasn't coming out in America for a while. And there were only 3 games for it at the time. It was F-Zero, Pilot Wings, and Super Mario World, right? And they brought some Famicoms over from Japan and let us take them home and play those 3 games easily a year before it ever came out. The Super NES ever came out here.
Wow.
And what was cool about that was, I had my friends over and we'd all be playing Super Mario World, but it was all in Japanese, and the manual was in Japanese. And, we're sitting there trying to get through Mario without really knowing what we're doing, because all the instructions, we couldn't read them. So it was all just trial and error,
Yeah.
But we did. It was the same thing with F-Zero. There's a place in F-Zero where you can't make a jump unless you press down on the control stick. And we didn't know that we couldn't read the manual, and there was really it took us forever to figure that out.
Yeah. A lot of trial and error.
Yeah, it was pretty cool though. But as far as a test, I don't recall if there was really a test. I mean, there may have been some short little thing that asked some questions like, where do you get the blue ring in the first quest of Zelda? A little thing like that. I don't know. It's possible. I don't really remember it. There may have been, but really the test was once you got on the phones, they would know whether or not you knew your stuff. Because now your test is every day. These kids calling you up and asking you the most esoteric things, and you need to know it.
Okay, so speaking of phone calls, I'm curious, what was the worst call you ever took? What was the situation, and why was it a nightmare, or why didn't it go well? I'm sure you got tons and tons of calls over the years.
Well, I'll tell you what, the worst calls, hands down, were always when adults would call. See, when kids call, they don't need much to go on. They're already excited. They're on an adventure, and they're having a great time. And they call them to say, how do I get through the Lost Woods? And all I would have to say is something like, well, did you see a lady somewhere that gave you some directions? And they'd be like, oh, yeah, I remember her. Oh, great. Yeah, that's all I need. Thanks. Bye. Click. And they're gone. They're off and running, right? Adults, however, oh, my God. Adults don't have the patience nor the skill set to be playing video games, and they call up and they're like, you're going to stay on this phone with me until I get through this, and I don't believe this is even possible, and da-da-da-da, and how does it, and they're all ticked off because they don't have the skills to get through it, and they don't have the patience to practice. See, kids will keep fighting the same boss for a week straight until they get it.
Yeah.
And every time they go up against it, they know that this is the time they're going to beat them, right? An adult, they fight a boss 3 times, can't do it, and they're calling me griping. And that's when it gets bad. And I actually, probably the worst one was I had this guy that just wouldn't let it go. Now, you can't really stay on the phone. It was all about the customer, and it was a family company. So, I had to stay on as long as he wanted me to. But Nintendo did encourage us to try to get off the phone and get to the next caller, right? Because it really is about getting through everyone who wants help, and spending an hour talking to one customer is not really fair to all of our other customers, right?
Yeah.
So you had that fine line you had to walk where you don't want to hang up on the guy, but at the same time, you really kind of want to get him off the phone. You've been talking to him too long. But this guy wouldn't let it go, and he wouldn't let me, I was trying to hint at, I've got other people to help. Is there anything else? And he's like, yeah, there's something else. You're going to tell him to stay here until I do this. And I'm like, oh, my God. And then finally it got to the point where after, 45 minutes or something, he offered to buy a plane ticket for me to fly out to Texas and come to his house and do it for him. And I'm obviously, that's silly. That's absolutely ridiculous. And it was all I could do not to laugh. And at that point, I was like, sir, I can't do that. And I had to make that decision to end that call at that point,
What was the game that he was playing? Do you remember?
I want to say it was Bucky O'Hare, maybe.
Okay.
Or another game similar to that. One of those games that's a side-scroller that's just really, really hard.
Yeah.
There were a lot of times when you just had to tell people, look, there's no secret, there's no trick, it just takes practice. And those were the hard ones to do because, if you could just tell them something like, the ring is under a tombstone in the graveyards, they could run there and do it, no problem. But when it's something that just took you, hours of practice to do it, there was nothing more you can say to them. It was kind of frustrating for both of you because you can't just solve their problem on a phone call. They're going to have to understand that they have to practice and they have to keep trying or give up, one or the other. There's plenty of games out there to play. Maybe this game's not the one for you.
Yeah.
And that's when it was really tough, was, dealing with adults who didn't want to take the time to practice the game. And that one guy in particular, man, I'll never forget him.
Yikes. A personal plane ticket just for you, Kirk? That sounds like an adventure. Now, can you take us back to your desk at Nintendo? What was your desk like? What was the atmosphere like? And what were your coworkers like?
Yeah, well, so when you've got a bunch of people who play video games for a living, first thing you got to know about it, personality-wise, we're all going to want to have fun at every moment. So, yeah, I mean, we had a really good time. Everybody was a goofball like me, and we would, we'd have like Nerf gun fights and stuff. And, everybody had toys on their desk to decorate their desks, so there was no shortage of fun things to do. But the main thing was that work always had to come first. So, I mean, if there was a heavy queue of calls, everybody was down in there at their desks answering calls, and that's what we were doing. It was but at those times when the call volume went to zero and we had nothing to do, yeah, that's when the Nerf guns and stuff came out, and we'd have a really great time. And it really was great. But as far as the office environment, it was basically just, imagine a sea of cubicles like you see in any office environment. The soundproof cubicles where everybody's got their own little area to work and doesn't bleed over into the other guy's work area, and you sat there. So the desk would be, if you were looking at my desk, on the left was a 15-inch television and a Nintendo Entertainment System and the Advantage controller. We all use the Advantage controller because we didn't want our hands to cramp up, right?
Yeah.
So you're playing video games 8-10 hours a day, you want that Advantage controller. And then on the other side, we had, you had your computer with a monitor so you could look up people's accounts, Nintendo Power account, or getting their Nintendo repaired or whatever. And in between those, in the center of the desk, was your Plantronics phone system with a headset, which is what you use to, obviously talk to people and enter in the codes for what game you took that call on. And then above all of that, there was a shelf that locked, and you open up the locking door, and there was all these giant green 3-ring binders. Now, these green 3-ring binders are where we kept all the maps that other gameplay counselors had made to help other gameplay counselors if they hadn't played that game or if they couldn't remember, what they had done. So, and now you have to remember, this is before the internet. We didn't have, YouTube or anything like that to go looking up how to do stuff. So we had these hard copy, hand-drawn maps in these big binders. And so that's where my Mega Man 2 maps ended up, was in those binders. And I didn't know at the time that I gave them those hand-drawn maps. I gave them to them just to show my ambition and how much I loved gaming. And it turned out that from my first day as a gameplay counselor, I was already contributing to their database, which was, what landed me the job.
Yeah.
So if there weren't maps there, then they'd be like sheets of commonly asked questions, for the game. So if you were playing, you got a call on Ghosts and Goblins, and you never played Ghosts and Goblins, you could pull down your 3-ring binder that had G in it and flip over to that, and hopefully some gameplay counselor had made a map or a commonly asked questions sheet that would handle, the question that you were being asked. And if not, you could transfer them. You could always say, hey, I'm not really well versed in this game. I'm going to go get someone who can help you out better than me. All right. You put them on hold, go running. Like if it was Legacy of the Wizard, I'd go to my buddy Viper, who's in the same issue I'm in, by the way. His best game accomplishment was he beat Legacy of the Wizard in a stupid amount of time. I mean, really fast.
I remember.
I love that game.
I remember reading that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would go to him and I'd be like, hey, Viper, I got this guy, Legacy of the Wizard. I don't know how to help him. Can you help him out? He'd be like, yeah, great. Send him over. Love it. And I'd transfer the person to him and take a different call. Right. And so, you had those 3-ring binders up there. And then next to that, you had all your Nintendo Power issues because, of course, you had every issue of Nintendo Power that ever came out. And then next to that would be your strategy guides. Eventually, Nintendo Power started putting out strategy guides focusing on specific games. Boy, were those a godsend. And so you'd have all of those, too, up there that you could reference. And that's what you had. And as you got through a game, if you noticed that the 3-ring binder didn't have a map for a certain game and you felt, like you could do it, you went ahead and contributed to that. And over time, we got more and more binders and more maps until the internet came along, but that's way down the road. So
now, how long did you work as a Nintendo counselor?
6 years. I was started in May of 89 and I left in July of 95.
Okay, and when did they stop the position of Nintendo counselor?
It was a little while after that. By the time I left, they had moved all the 3-ring binders and stuff, information from those, onto the computer, but it still wasn't the internet. It was just an intranet inside Nintendo. But I'm not sure when the internet became widely popular, but I imagine that right around the time the internet became a widespread thing, there was no need for gameplay counselors anymore. I don't really know exactly what year that was. I had moved on. When I left there, I moved on to be a writer for a PlayStation game called Shadow Madness at a company called Big Rain, and I pretty much lost contact with the people I worked with at Nintendo, and I didn't really look back at what I had done there, and I was looking forward. So I'm not exactly sure when the gameplay counselors stopped.
Did you say Shadow Madness?
Yeah, there's a game for PlayStation called Shadow Madness. We started it with Big Rain, and that's who I worked for as a writer, and I wrote big chunks of that game. And then one day, so ASCII, I don't know if you've ever heard of ASCIIware, but they were the people that were funding the game, and Big Rain missed a few milestones. When you're creating a video game, you have these goalposts, these milestones you have to hit to prove to the people funding the game that you're on track and that it's going to be successful and that everything's fine, you're not running into problems. Well, we missed some of those goalposts, and ASCII pulled their money. And I came into work one day, and they came into the break room and said, hey, we can't pay you.
Oh.
And go home. The project's over. Go home. We're sorry. So I ended up, getting laid off from that, and I went to work at another company, and then I got a call back. Eventually, like a few months later, maybe 6 months later, Crave Entertainment picked it up. They bought the rights to Shadow Madness to finish the game, and they called me up and asked me to come back, and I turned them down. And I think a big part of why I turned them down was I was pretty secure in the company I was at the time, and I wasn't sure that the project was going to, getting laid off like that, having them come in the middle of your week and just say, hey, we can't pay you and you don't have a job anymore. And it just set wrong with me.
Oh, absolutely. That will.
So I just turned Crave down, and they did go on to finish the game. But they did tell me, though, they go, if you don't come back, we're going to use the stuff you wrote, but we're not going to give you credit.
Oh, that's lame.
And so you can play Shadow Madness and you can get to the credits and you will play through huge parts of it that I wrote, but you won't see my name in the credits at the end.
I looked up Shadow Madness because it sounded familiar, and I recognized the cover, and it's funny. Maybe once a month I'll go like retro game hunting. I had it in my hand last weekend. I didn't buy it, but I'm definitely going to buy it next time I have an opportunity. That's cool that you got to work on it.
Yeah, it's one of those turn-based RPGs that fell out of favor when real-time RPGs became a thing. But I believed in it. I believed in the story. I don't think that they refined it and finished it as well as they could have. I think it could have been better. I think they kind of rushed it. But all the people I worked with, I loved all those people. They were all extremely, extremely talented people. The artists were great. I have a lot of original artwork and stuff from it, like concept art stuff that I took home with me.
Oh, wow.
If anybody ever tries to say, your name's not in there and I don't believe you worked on this, I'd be like, really? Then how'd I get a hold of all this?
Yeah.
But, yeah, and it'd be nice to get credit in the game and be able to point to it and say, hey, there's my name. But whatever. I have a copy of it myself. I haven't played it all the way through, though. I don't even own a PlayStation, so.
Oh, man. Okay, so the counselors, as you mentioned previously, you're all, you have the same personality, you're young, you love video games. Did you guys ever party together? Was there any rowdy Christmas parties? And if so, did you ever attend them?
Yeah, it's funny. Funny you should ask about that, because I was kind of expecting it, because I've heard from other people. Other people have gotten in touch with me. I did an interview with a guy on a site called The Morning Toast some years back, and I think he asked the same thing and had heard rumors that there were these bawdy parties that Nintendo threw, and I think it's funny that that's a rumor that leaked out when really, yes, Nintendo did throw one party a year, Christmas party, and it was a big deal. They spent a lot of money. You could bring a +1. The first year I went to it, it was at the Columbia Tower here in Seattle, which I think at the time was the tallest building in Seattle. And it was very posh, really nice venue for a party, And they picked us up in limos and drove us home in limos.
Wow.
And yeah, and there was drinking, and there was door prizes and music and food and all of that, and it was great. And I'm not going to say, that we didn't get completely buttered, because we did. But it wasn't as rowdy as the rumors would suggest. I mean, the rumors of how rowdy they were greatly exaggerated. Nothing got broken. Nobody drove home drunk or anything like that. Like I said, we had limos to take us home. Nothing like that. I mean, I think that the rumor about Nintendo parties being rowdy is just one of those legends that, people hear about Nintendo throwing a party, and it must be something, and then it just kind of grows and grows and snowballs until, suddenly it's like, yeah, it was a rowdy thing. There were strippers or whatever. It's nothing like that. It was a great party, to be sure, and I definitely got hammered, but and that was fun. Nintendo didn't and that wasn't Nintendo's fault either. Nintendo didn't encourage you to get drunk. They gave you like 2 drink tickets. If you wanted more, you could pay for them, right? And there was nobody really there that was underage. We were all pretty much, everyone was pretty much over 21. Nintendo would never serve alcohol to somebody underage or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, it was nowhere near as rowdy as the rumors would suggest. But yeah, there was that one party a year that was pretty cool.
Now, do you still talk to any of your friends or any of the counselors that you used to work with?
Not really. I kind of lost contact with them. There were a couple that were really good friends of mine who are still in the industry, but you know how life goes. You move on. I moved on to a different career and didn't really keep in touch. And it's sad. I think about getting back in touch with them a lot, but I refuse to start a Facebook account. So, getting back in touch with them is not the easiest thing. But maybe one day. There are a couple of guys that I remember from there that I would love to see again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you look back at your time as a Nintendo counselor, this is a question that I ask every single person that I interview, and I always get the best answers. This is my favorite question. But when you look back at your time as a Nintendo counselor, what's that one memory you'll never forget? It could be something funny, something serious, or just that vivid feeling that you won't ever forget as your time as a Nintendo counselor. What is that?
There's a lot of them. I mean, honestly, and when I appeared in Nintendo Magazine, that was like really cool. But I think probably the one that really, really makes me feel good to reminisce about was when they selected me to represent Nintendo at the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago.
Wow.
One year, the year the FX chip came out. So it was a really big show for Nintendo because they were going to be showing off this revolutionary chip and the game Star Fox and it was a really big deal inside Nintendo. And they wanted two gameplay counselors to go and represent Nintendo and answer questions about the chip and just gameplay questions in general, and just really hype this up for them. And they knew that their gameplay counselors were kind of their in-house celebrities, right? So there was a lot of competition for that. Everybody wanted to go. If you were a gameplay counselor, that was what you wanted. And we had hundreds of gameplay counselors. So for them to select me as one of the two that got to go was like a dream. When they came to me and told me that I was one of the two that was selected to go, I thought I was going to pass out. I was so excited. I was so honored that, a company like Nintendo felt that my gameplay ability and my job that I had done for them as a gameplay counselor warranted picking me out of all of these terrific. And I worked with some really good gamers. We were all really, really good at what we did, and so for them to pick me was just phenomenal. And it's a memory that gives me pride to this day. I have every single pin, everything I collected at that Consumer Electronics Show, I still have, and I look at the stuff and I just, that's my glory days,
Yeah. That sounds really special. That's a really cool achievement in your career that you got to do. And like you said, only two got selected and you were one of them. Yeah. So that's pretty special.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. That's got to be the memory. Yeah.
So I have a couple questions about Mega Man 2 that I'd love to ask you about. I know Mega Man 2 means a lot to you, and obviously it kind of helped get your career going. When was the first time that you played Mega Man 2? Had you played the original first, or was this your first entry into the series?
Oh, no, yeah. I played Mega Man. I was a huge fan of Mega Man. Before Mega Man 2 came out, Mega Man was easily my favorite game. It was tough but fair. The premise of it was great, how you beat these guys and then you get their weapon and you figure out which of their weapons works best on the next one, and just the whole thing about Mega Man was great. Plus I thought he was cool looking. What a cool little character, Mega Man. The way he jumps to the way he looks when he jumps, just everything about it was great. I was a big fan of Capcom games overall anyway. Mega Man was awesome. And then, so I'm pretty sure I bought Mega Man 2 the day it came out.
Wow.
I think that I was anticipating Mega Man 2's release and went and got it, if not the day it came out, then the following weekend anyway. Whenever I was able to get down there. But I got it pretty quick after it came out because I was, looking forward to it. I couldn't wait for it to come out. And I started playing it, and it wasn't as hard as Mega Man 1. But that was okay because it was so much fun, and something about it just clicked with me, and I liked it more than Mega Man original, and I just played the hell out of it for just all the time. It was like my go-to game if I was bored or whatever. I just throw that in and start playing it. Here's the ironic part is I still have a copy of the original Mega Man in the box. But I don't know what happened to my copy of Mega Man 2. Isn't that weird?
That is weird. That's... Yeah.
But it might be in a box somewhere, too, but I haven't seen it in 20 years.
Gotta find that.
I still have my copy of Mega Man 1.
Wow. So your Nintendo counselor profile boasts that you were able to beat Mega Man 2 with just one life. Now, how were you able to achieve that, and... what was your mindset the first time you achieved that feature? Was there any ever close calls, or were you nervous near the end?
Yeah. So I think the reason I was able to do it was because I played it so many times that I was so familiar with the game that one day I was playing it, I was just, doodling through it, and I realized I got to the Wily stage and realized that, or maybe I had gotten to the place where you fight all the robot masters for a second time, and realized that I hadn't died yet. And I was like, wait a second. I haven't died yet, and I'm here near the end now. All I got to do is beat these masters, go through Wily, and I thought, let's do this. I'm going to, And so I beat all the robot masters again. That was easy. And ended up in the Wily stage, and I'm like, okay, so all I have to do is get through Wily, and I will have achieved something spectacular, right? So I, went against all the bosses, was kicking butt all the way through it until I get to, there's a place just before you get to Wily where you drop down a shaft, and the shaft curves to the left and right, and it's like 2 or 3 screens long where you have to change screens in between, which is adds a challenge. And then lining this column or this shaft you're falling down are these spikes that if you touch one, you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
Instantly dead.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right, and it curves. It doesn't just go straight down. You've got to know when to move left and when to move right. And the thing's only as wide as like 1.5 times the width of Mega Man himself. So you've only got a few pixels of leeway here. And I thought when I got to that and I was about to jump into that, I thought, this is where I'm going to mess it up. This is where I'm going to lose my beating it in one man. I'm going to hit one of those spikes and it's going to be over, So that was the spot where I felt the adrenaline. I was like, oh man, all right, well, let's do it. And I jumped down, and lo and behold, next thing I know, I'm standing in, at the bottom of the shaft. I didn't blow up, and I'm like, I've done it. I've done it, because I know I can beat Wily without dying. I've done it plenty of times before, So it was so it was before I jumped down that shaft that I was like, oh, this is where I'm going to screw it up. And it was when I got to the bottom of it when I realized this was going to happen.
You're going to do it.
I'm going to beat Mega Man 2 with one man, yeah. And then I did, and I was, it was something. I had to do it again later at Nintendo to show them that it was possible so I could print that in the magazine.
Very cool.
So I did it more than once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say is the hardest robot master in Mega Man 2?
The hardest robot master?
Yeah. Or maybe your favorite. Either or.
Well, so probably if I had to say the hardest one, I think. Wow, that's a tough choice. Windman what was the name of the guy that Airman? So Airman had those little whirlwind things he'd throw at you that bounce your bullets back at you.
Oh yeah, okay.
So you had to get in really close to him to even be able to shoot him. So that was kind of a challenge, I think. But Flashman with his time stop thing made for an interesting fight.
Yup.
My favorite would be Metal Man, simply because he was so easy to beat and he had the most useful weapon in the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he was my favorite. I liked his weapon, and I liked being able to beat him real quick and have that weapon for the rest of the game. But hardest one, I guess I would, if I had to pick between those, it'd be either Flashman or Airman. But then, if we're talking about bosses, then I'd have to go with the Mecha Dragon.
Ugh.
Because you've only got those 3 little blocks to stand on.
Yep.
And if you fall, it's over. And he was really hard until I learned the secret, what to do to keep from being knocked off those blocks. But until I learned that, I got so frustrated with Mecha Dragon early on in the game.
What's the secret?
Well, when he hits you, how when Mega Man gets hit, he kind of gets stunned for a second and moves back a few pixels. And that's death to you. If you're standing in the middle of the block and you get hit, you're going to stun and fall backwards, and you're going to fall between the 2 little bricks. But if you stand such that 1 foot, Mega Man can stand on a brick with 1 foot hanging off the brick and only have 1 foot on it. If you position him just right, he'll have 1 foot on the brick and 1 will be hanging off the edge. So if you were to stand at the front of the brick with 1 foot hanging off, then when you got hit, you'd get knocked back, but not knocked back so far you'd fall off the brick. And if you did it on the other end, on the right side of the brick, with your right foot hanging off and you got hit, you would at least fall back far enough to land on that second brick down. So it was all about just positioning Mega Man in the right spot. obviously making the right jumps too, right?
Yeah.
But even if you're jumping from that particular spot, you're going to get knocked, you're going to get knocked back, but either not so far or just far enough to survive. So it was all about positioning. And of course, they're expecting you to position him in the middle of the block where you have sure footing. But that's, in the end, when you get hit, that's not going to help you.
Yeah.
So, when I figured that out, then it was easy.
Okay.
Then I never fell. Yeah.
So obviously Mega Man 2 is a very special game to you. You got a lot of history with it. Can you kind of share with us what makes Mega Man 2 one of the premier games on the NES? Here's your chance to really discuss what you love about this game.
Yeah, well, it just was a perfect follow-up to the original. A little easier, like I said, sure, but because it was so much fun, it was okay. I think that a lot of people liked Mega Man but found it too hard. Mega Man 1 was really, really tough, and I think a lot of people loved Mega Man but then found it too hard to complete. Whereas I think Capcom may have looked at that and said, okay, we still want to hold true to what Mega Man's all about, but let's make it more accessible to people. Let's add some items that help people out. Let's maybe not have it be quite so tough. Let's get even better music than the time before. I mean, the music, I think we can both agree the music in Mega Man is some of the best 8-bit music, out there.
Absolutely.
And then I really liked the diversity of weapons. Plus, like I mentioned, the items that you get to use, items 1, 2, and 3, though, I think those really, really helped the playability of the game and expanded that a little bit more. And then just how diverse the weapons were in this. I mean, you have a time stomp weapon. That's, imagine having that in Mega Man 1. I just, that pretty much all of that. It was just, I just think Capcom really put a lot of thought into how to make it more accessible to people, more fun, and that even gets into a story I have for you about the beating it with one man and why people didn't believe me, which we can get into in a little bit. But
let's hear it. Let's hear it.
All right. So probably the thing I remember most about Mega Man 2 in general is how it kind of changed my life for a couple of weeks at work, because as soon as that issue of Nintendo Power came out and it said I beat it with one man, our phones at Nintendo started lighting up. And all with people wanting to talk to me. I want to talk to Kirk Starr and tell him what a lying sack of crap I think he is. Is that people were convinced that you could not do it with one man. Not because it was too hard, but because there was a room in the Wily stage that everyone thought you had to die and come back to get through it. So there's this room in the Wily stage where you enter and there are a bunch of these domes on the wall that are firing at you. And you can only destroy those domes with crash bombs. There are also some breakout walls that are throughout the level that can also be destroyed with crash bombs. Only 2 of the domes in the room actually have walls that you must take out in order to get to the dome behind them. The rest of the domes are free to be shot at. You don't have to destroy all the walls. But the thing is, Capcom looked at it and said, getting through this in one man is extremely difficult. So, at least is what I think they did. And I think what they decided to make it so if you destroy all the walls with crash bombs and you die, and you come back with more crash bombs, all the walls you destroyed will still be destroyed. But the domes on the walls will respawn. So you could go in the room, destroy all the walls, die, come back, and you'd have enough crash bombs to destroy all the domes. But the fact of the matter was that if you only destroyed the 2 walls that you had to get to the domes behind them, you had exactly the number of crash bombs you need if you never miss to get all the domes plus the 2 walls you had to do. And then you just had to use your items to get around the other walls. So this was a way that Capcom said, look, there's a way you can do this in one man, but it's going to take perfect aim and it's going to take perfect use of your items to get through it in one man. So we're going to make it so if you die and come back, the walls won't come back and it'll be a little easier for you. And that's one of the ways I think that Capcom made the game a little easier and more accessible to people while making it still possible to get through in one man if you were good enough. Now, people would call up and say, you can't get through the Crash Bomb room in one man. And they'd be so smug about it, You don't have enough Crash Bombs. And I'd be like, and then every time I'd explain to them what I just explained to you about you don't have to break out all the walls. Just break out the 2 you need, and you've got enough Crash Bombs for all the domes. And I would invariably, they'd be like, oh, I never thought of it like that. I'm sorry. Wow, you're right. I'm sorry. Most of the time, they would apologize to me for being so nasty about it. I'm like, hey, no problem. It's all right. Is there anything else I can help you with? But it got to the point where so many people were calling about this that Nintendo had to put out a memo saying, stop transferring people to Kirk to answer this question. You all know the answer. Just give them the answer and move on. Stop transferring them to him. He can't spend his whole day answering this one question. But for a couple of weeks there, it caused mayhem at Nintendo just because people didn't believe it was possible. And it was something. I mean, I got letters too. People would write me letters saying I was full of crap.
Talk about hate mail.
Huh?
Talk about hate mail. That's funny that you're getting all that flack for that.
Yeah, but it never bothered me though, because I understood where they were coming from. I got it. I knew where they were coming from, and I just chuckled, write them a letter back, tell them what, here's how it is, and thanks for contacting Nintendo.
That's pretty crazy that you turned the counseling room upside down with that little profile on yourself.
Yeah, for a couple of weeks anyway. Yeah. It's crazy.
When was the last time you played Mega Man 2, and can you still run through it with just one life?
Oh man. Well, it's been over 20 years since I've even seen Mega Man 2. And I'm older now. I'm 55 years old. I'm like, my hand-eye coordination isn't the same. My eyesight's not the same. My reflexes aren't what they used to be. I'm still a decent gamer. I mean, my gamer score is over 85,000 on Xbox, but I seriously doubt I could get through Mega Man 2 in one guy nowadays. I don't think I've got the reflexes for it anymore. Yeah.
Kirk, I wanted to ask you about another popular game on the NES while I still have you on the phone. Now, this is a game that I've recently been playing, and I want your insight on it. That game is going to be Contra. When did you first play Contra, and what was your initial impressions of it?
I'm pretty sure the first time I ever saw Contra and played it was in the arcade when I was in high school. And I know this is probably going to be controversial to your listeners, but I never really liked Contra as much as most people did. A lot of people really, really liked it. I remember, at Nintendo, when I worked at Nintendo, and people were playing it, it was one of the more popular games that, people would check out and play. I mean, like I said, I had to play it. It was one of the ones I had to finish in training because it was so popular. But I don't know. It has a lot of similarities to the Mega Man series in the sense that it's a lot of pattern memorization. It's a left to right side scrolling platformer with guns. There are a lot of similarities, but I don't know. I thought Contra was a little slower, a little easier to get through. I mean, get the spread shot and just murder everything.
Spread shot for sure.
But yeah, I think the first time I played it was in the arcade, and it was okay. I mean, it had, at the time, the graphics were pretty good. I remember one of the bosses looked like something out of Alien, which I thought was pretty cool at the time. So it was okay, but I never really understood the hype, to be honest.
So as a counselor, I mean, I'm sure you got a lot of calls on needing help with Contra. How many times did you have to share that Konami code with callers?
Countless times. It was, in fact, I honestly believe that the only reason Contra was on the top 10 most called list was because of people calling for that code. Most of the time, it would just be you'd get a call, Nintendo Gameplay, this is Kirk, how can I help you? Yeah, what's the Konami code? Okay, and then you give it to them, they're like, all right, thanks, bye, click. And that was the whole call, which was good for my numbers, but, not much of a challenge as far as doing the job. But, yeah, so most of the time it was people just calling to get that code and, get the 30 extra guys and move on.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now, I know that Contra wasn't as special to you as many other games, but why do you think it became a successful hit on the NES? What are some of the best qualities about Contra?
Yeah, I think probably a big part of the reason that it became so popular on the NES was because it was in the arcade first. It was ported over as an arcade game, and a lot of games were ported over from the arcade, but I think it was really popular in the arcade, and I think a lot of people were anticipating it coming to the NES, and when it did, people, broke down the doors to get a hold of it because they already liked it from the arcade. And I think also because, look, this was one of the few games that you could have two players on the same screen. You know what I mean? This was kind of unheard of at the time that Contra came out of the NES. I don't remember another game where you and a friend could both play the same game on the same screen. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. If you can think of another one, tell me. But I racked my brain, and I can't think of another game where both of you were fighting the same things on the same screen. I mean, it was. I'm sure they'd already started split screen things by then. Maybe not. I don't know. It's been a long time. But, I mean, being able to play with a friend, I think, was a big part of it. Not to mention that you had... It kind of was... it was unlike anything else that came over from the arcade. Like, you had Defender, Asteroids, Spaceship Joust, but nothing really that was like Contra. So, that came from the arcade. So, it was kind of unique in that way as well. So... so I think, for all those reasons, by the time it hit the NES, people were already stoked for it and were, beating down the doors to get it. So that'd be my guess.
So for people that are listening and, they're thinking about playing Contra for the first time, what's the key to beating it? Is it finding the right weapon like a spread shot? What's your best advice to gamers who want to try Contra out?
Well, I guess the things I would say about it is, obviously, pattern memorization is going to get you real far, but mainly, and playing with a friend certainly helps. So does the Konami code. Sure, 30 guys is going to help, but, look, there's a lot of, not a lot of weapons, but there's weapons in the game you can pick up that you might think are going to help you, but they're not. Stay away from the flamethrower. Stay away from the laser. Sure, they're shiny and cool, and they fire differently than the other games, but they're not really that helpful. The spread shot's going to be your best friend. Behind that, the machine gun with its rapid rate of fire is going to help you. But don't be tempted to grab the flamethrower. Those stupid little flame balls go all over the place, and they don't really hit anything. And the laser, I won't even get into the reason that weapon is so crappy. It's just terrible. It misfires. You fire once, and then you go to fire again, and then the first one you fire disappears and doesn't hit anything. It's just, don't. So that's what I would say to beginners in Contra. Don't fall for the laser and the flamethrower. Pick up the spread shot whenever you can, and when you don't have that, use the machine gun and just learn the patterns. The bosses, when you're on a boss, they all have very distinct patterns. They fire in very memorable ways. Just memorize it and dodge and shoot like crazy.
So that was my interview with Kirk Starr, one of the most popular Nintendo counselors. I cannot thank Kirk enough for his time today to discuss his memories at Nintendo, all the counseling he did for all the players, and the games that he helped guide us through. He is a true expert on Mega Man 2. Kirk, thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, thank you, the listener, for tuning in. If you love exclusive interviews with game creators and game developers, make sure you hit that sub button to watch and listen to plenty of more interviews that I have coming up.